the perceived fracture of the quote IDW over COVID issues. So, for better or for worse, there was something that people perceived to be called the IDW, which you and I were perceived to be a part of, along with people like the Weinstein brothers, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, etc., Majid Nawaz, Michael Shermer, other people. And when COVID hit, it seemed like there was a fracture between the people like Brett and Majid that went to different degrees into conspiracy land on questions of the vaccine's safety and efficacy. And people, I think, like yourself, from what I've seen, and Sam Harris and Michael Shermer, and I think, I guess probably myself as well, that seemed more trusting of the mainstream health institutions on those questions. So people are curious, basically, what happened, right? You guys were all like a big happy family, and now mom and dad aren't getting along, and what's the deal? I think that's a question that people have in their head. So I'm curious if you even think about what happened in those terms and what you think happened. I have my own theory, but I'll ask you first.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the IDW was a term given to a quite broad set of people, and we were never some kind of groups that hung out or even talked much at all. I've never met Brett Weinstein. But a lot of people, particularly online, seem to think that this group of people needed to have a consensus. Now if you looked at this group of people, what we did have a consensus agreement upon was the toxicity or the excessiveness of identity politics. So I would agree with someone like Brett Weinstein or Jordan Peterson on excessive identity politics being harmful to society in general and to individuals. But I don't agree with them on other issues. And I would just say for myself that in as much as the establishment is pursuing identity politics, and what I mean by that is like special advantages for women or affirmative action, that type of thing. In as much as the establishment is promoting those policies and those ideas uncritically, I'm anti-establishment. So I will. There are many reasons why I am critical of policies that emphasize the differences between us, whether it's sex or gender or race and so on and so forth. I don't like the uncritical acceptance of such policies. However, I don't see public health as having that much to do with identity politics, if anything. And I'm not anti-establishment when it comes to public health. I'm not anti-establishment when it comes to something like national security. So I'm not, I'm on the side of the West when it comes to Ukraine. Like, I think I don't have any motivation to make justifications for what Putin is doing in the Ukraine. So, and I think that the difficulty has been for a lot of people in our audience, they seemed to think that I was, and Quillette was, just contrarian and anti-establishment, full stop. And that this was meant to come in a package, and that I and the rest of us at Quillette were meant to question the establishment on absolutely everything. And that's sort of been a misreading of our ethos. We've always taken issues on a case-by-case basis, and just because someone is anti-establishment or questions the consensus view on something like identity politics doesn't mean they're going to question the consensus view on other issues. Climate change is another good example. I mean, I question some of the proposed solutions to climate change. Like, I'm a critic of renewable technologies like wind and solar, but I don't question the fact that climate change is happening. I trust the science, So I think it can be difficult for an audience to understand that political issues, social issues need to be understood on a case-by-case basis, and that a rational person doesn't lump all of these diverse issues into a package. You can't come up with a one-size-fits-all answer to all of these complex issues. That they have to be looked at individually.
Yeah, so I think I agree with everything you said there, and I think that also describes my pre-existing, which is to say prior to COVID, my orientations towards all these issues. I always felt like I was trying my best to be scientific and philosophically minded on any issue. And that's what put me at odds with the people that think every racial disparity is racism, right? That is a profoundly unscientific point of view. Like there's so many hundreds of examples that disconfirm that hypothesis, and that's what animated me on that issue. And I'm going to an Ivy League school, I was thinking, why are people trained to think scientifically pretending that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 here? But that is my basic orientation. My orientation was never really anti-establishment or conspiratorial. And so what I think happened is that what was described as the IDW always contained two somewhat different kinds of people, and some of those people were actually quite into conspiracy from the beginning. So for example, I remember, and these are all people that I think have contributed a lot of value on a lot of different issues. So no shade is being intended or thrown. But I remember when I met Eric Weinstein, at some event in New York, and introduced myself, and we'd heard of each other and so forth. He kind of asked me quickly and kind of offhandedly, "Do you believe in conspiracies?" And this is before COVID. And I think I said something like, I tend to not believe them unless I see a crazy, overwhelming, extraordinary amount of evidence. And he said, so I basically said no. And he said, "Oh, well, that's ridiculous. I'm actually a part of 4 different conspiracies myself." And then I said, "Which ones?" I said, "Which ones?" And then he said, "Obviously, I can't tell you."
Yeah. Well, that's a remarkable interaction. Yeah.
It is remarkable. It's a remarkable first conversation with any human being, actually. It's stuck in my mind to this day for that reason. All this to say, I think there was a pre-existing difference between folks like Eric and folks like yourself and Sam, in that you had different attitudes towards conspiracy thinking in general.
Right.
Some being more friendly to it, some being very opposed to it. And those attitudes were just, that difference was just exposed for the first time for real during COVID.
That's a really interesting way of putting it, because how I first became politicized was I thought that a lot of rhetoric around feminism, I thought a lot of feminist narratives were conspiracy theories. I thought this concept of the patriarchy keeping all of us women down and oppressed, and there was some kind of invisible layer of power, this systematic oppression. I thought it was a conspiracy theory because it didn't correspond with the empirical evidence that I experienced in my own life and I could see with my own eyes. So that feeling that feminism, these narratives that were constantly being promoted in mainstream media were a low-level type of conspiracy theory. That's what motivated, that's what politicized me originally. And so, it was my skepticism towards conspiratorial ideas that sort of got me going in my career. And then the other thing is that as a student of psychology, I was aware that there were bodies of research that were not politically correct, and that journalists or lay people were not very familiar with. And I had a tremendous respect for the scientific. I do have a tremendous respect for the scientific method and scientific rationalism. And I wasn't going to throw that out because the pandemic came along. I've always been pro-science. I mean, I'm not pro-science TM. Like, I'm not I'm aware that biases creep into fields of research and that groupthink can afflict entire disciplines. I'm aware of that. But we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You know, that we don't have any better way of understanding the world than the scientific method. And I just found it disappointing that some of these people with large platforms sort of just threw out a lot of nonsense and polluted the information ecosystem with their sort of crackpot theories. I found it disappointing, and I still do.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight one thing you said, that much feminists talk about the patriarchy holding women down felt conspiratorial to you. This is an exact feeling I've had about systemic racism and white supremacy. The idea, usually when scholars talk about systemic racism, they mean a system that is racist without any individual in the system having to be racist. And it's become this very amorphous idea where you don't actually have to identify any concrete thing made of atoms that is holding somebody back, but it's sort of, you know. And so I've actually described it, I think, as a conspiracy theory without the conspirators.